Welcome to Dowie After Dark. I'm Richie, and today we're going to be delving into the explosive power of the Dwarven artillery. If you've ever wanted to learn how to make the ground tremble and your enemies flee from your overwhelming firepower, then hopefully this video will be able to help you. From the precision of the grudge throwers to the overwhelming fire supremacy of the organ guns, we're going to be looking through the different artillery pieces that we have to offer. Today I will be talking about the humble bolt throwers, the cannons, the grudge throwers, and the organ guns. I'm not going to be talking about the flame cannons because unfortunately I can't really see a use for them in competitive play, so I'm just going to be talking about the things that you're probably going to be using in your games. I can talk about the flamethrowers in the future, but at the moment I'm just going to be talking about stuff that we're likely to see on the tabletops and that you probably want some help with. I'll be talking today how to position them, how to deploy them, and how they just work in general. For those of you that don't know how to use the artillery dice or what you should be targeting, we'll be talking about that today. So stick around and let's turn to the battlefield to have a look how they work. I have lined up some units for the artillery to shoot against, and we're going to run through what each of the artillery can do, why you want to use them in the game, and also the best uses for those artillery pieces. So first we're going to be talking about the humble bolt thrower with a 48-inch range, strength 6 and AP 3 with multiple wounds 2, and through. These are a really good piece of equipment to deal with big ranked up units. Unfortunately in the game at the moment we don't have that many ranked up units. So the best use for the bolt thrower is going in for the side ranks of cavalry. The best way to do this is position the bolt thrower at an extreme flank so then it can get a line straight up the side and then you can hit every model on the way through. The rule for through means that you reduce a strength per each model it goes through. So the first model will hit at strength 6, then it would be strength 5, then 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. This is really good for dealing with infantry, and sometimes they can also be quite good at dealing with monsters as well, as it is a really long range. The only problem we've got with bolt throwers is that the dwarf ones, being ballistic skill 3, is absolutely rubbish, so you're hitting on 5s most of the time. Now you can tool these up with runes. The rune that I would say to go for is the rune of skewering. This rune adds +1 strength and also means that there's no armor saves allowed, so you can get around those 2-up armor saves. When you're using bolt throwers, it's better off to take multiple of them. I would say put them on extreme flanks that the opponent has to worry about them, or you can shoot down the flanks of their units, or you can just pick pot shots off at heroes where they're going to have to send units to go deal with them. They are quite cheap, so you can throw these away. There's no problem with that at all. Unless you have souped them up with lots of rune points, then you want to try and keep them safe. But I would probably try and use them as sacrificial units on the extreme flanks where the opponent's going to have to send units over there that aren't going to be crashing into your main line. Next up, we're going to be talking about the cannon. Now, cannons are quite interesting. So we have a slightly weaker version of the cannon compared to the Empire Great Cannon, because ours is 48-inch range, strength 8, AP 2, armor being 2, cannon fire, cumbersome, move and shoot, and multiple wounds D3. This is compared to the strength 10 and a higher range of the Great Cannon, and also the fact that our multi-wounds is only D3 compared to the D3+1. So unfortunately ours is slightly less reliable going into monsters because you're going to be wounding a little bit worse if they got higher toughness. So say if you're shooting into something that's toughness 8, we are going to be wounding on 4s compared to their 2s, and also the D3+1 wounds does make quite a big difference. So the cannon fire special rule is when you're shooting the cannon, you work through these following steps. So you choose a target point, which is to choose a point within both War Machine's line of sight and its maximum range. So you're going to be picking a point that it can see. So you can only see before a unit, you can't see after a unit unless they're on a hill. But this does also mean that you can snipe stuff that's going to be behind a unit and try and pin through that unit. So you could pick a point here and then try and hit that behind there. So once you've chosen where you want to shoot and what line you want to go for, you then place a marker or a dice where you want to go from that unit, because your potential furthest that you can go is 10. You could misfire, but the lowest you're going to go if you don't misfire is only a 2. Now what you do then is once you pick your point, which I would normally do at either 10 inches back from the back of the base of the model, this is statistically the best to hit the unit, or 7 inches from the front. Those two measurements are usually the most statistically good to be able to hit your opponent. Now once you've done that, you then roll your dice. So that's an 8. So if I was 10 inches from the back, I would then hit 2 inches forward. Thus I would be right into the center of the unit, and then I would roll again for the bounce, because a cannonball always has a bounce, and then that's a misfire. Now I'll walk you through the misfires. A misfire on the first dice would mean you have to roll on the black powder misfire table. But a misfire on the second dice, which is the bounce, just means that the ball's going to stop in the ground. So you have your first shot, which you place, you roll your artillery dice to see how far it goes forward, that's where it lands, and then the second dice is for the bounce. You could get a possible maximum distance from this first point of 20 inches, or a minimum of only 2. Or you could just misfire and blow up. So on the black powder misfire table, the D6 result of a 1 is explodes. The weapon explodes in a thunderous noise, leaving a hole in the ground, and unfortunately your machine is destroyed. On a 2 to a 4 there is a malfunction, so it immediately loses a wound, and the model fails to shoot this turn and cannot shoot next turn, which is a bloody nightmare. 5 and a 6, that's not too bad. It just means that it's not going to be able to fire this turn. So there's a few handy ways that you can use cannons. Obviously, the temptation is there just going to be to try and shoot monsters straight away. But unfortunately, if you don't have line of sight to the monster, you don't have bombard. So if the large target is behind other units, you would have to pick a point on their base, which then means you're either going to have to roll a 2 or a 4 to be able to hit them. So usually their bases are about 4 inches, so you can normally hit them that way, but that's not a very good way to be able to hit them. In deployment, you're going to be looking at putting these on hills, so they've got line of sight out and can hit anything that they can see. This is really good because it frees up what they can see and they can target anything on the board that they can draw line of sight to. Because they're on a hill, they can literally draw line of sight to anything that isn't obscured by a wood or behind another hill. With cannons, I wouldn't put these behind your lines. I would either put them in the center with units flanking either side, or I would have these on extreme flanks so they can shoot and try and rake across units, or if you're trying to hit monsters, then just keep them away from your line so a monster can't just overrun through, hit another war machine, kill another war machine. So you want to make sure that these are separated and not just put straight together. If you end up putting your war machines like this right next to each other, anything can come through, kill this one, and then go straight into this one on the overrun move. So you want to make sure that they're either apart or like this, so the enemy units won't just be able to overrun straight through them. When you're determining the hits of what the cannon's done against the enemy units, any model which base lies underneath the strike point is hit automatically, and any model whose base lies underneath the pass of the bouncing ball cannonball is hit automatically as well. However, should a cannonball bounce through a formed unit, it can hit a maximum of 1 model per rank if the cannon lies in the front arc, and 1 model per file if the cannon lies in the unit's flank arc. Models that lie fully beyond the distance of the bounce are not hit. Something to watch out for with cannonballs is if you're shooting at a large target, the cannonball will stop in that large target, so it will not go through. This rule is called crunch. It hits it and then gets stuck, so unfortunately you can't rake through large targets. So if you're shooting there to try and get through, you're only going to be able to hit the large target. If the enemy units have started to get quite close to you and you're not sure what you can do because your cannonball isn't going to do too much, you can elect to use Grape Shot. Now Grape Shot is a range 12, strength 4, AP 1, it has move or shoot and needs more nails. So the cannon's crew do not use their ballistic skill when firing Grape Shot. Instead, the shot uses needs more nails special rule. This weapon uses the black powder misfire table as well. So for shooting the Grape Shot, you roll an artillery dice. If a misfire is rolled, something has gone horribly wrong. Say we didn't roll a misfire and we rolled an 8. That means that you would have 8 automatic hits that have hit that unit at strength 4 and AP 1. This could be the difference between killing a small enemy unit that's coming to kill your cannon or not. This can be really good, but unfortunately there is a lot of luck and chance in place with it as well. I quite like cannons because they're statistically quite good at hitting their targets. Unfortunately, sometimes with only D3 damage, they don't do as much damage as they want. Something you can do to make these better is by taking some runes or an engineer with them. An engineer will be able to let you re-roll one of your misfires a turn. Also, the rune of forging and the rune of reloading are really good. The rune of forging is a once per use rune that lets you re-roll one of your misfires if you don't have an engineer nearby. And the rune of reloading means that anything on a misfire table that rolled isn't a 1, you can still fire the next turn, which is really handy. Next up, I want to speak to you about my personal favourite of all of the war machines that the Dwarves have to offer, which is the humble grudge thrower. These are brilliant, and I always try and take at least one of these, and probably 2 if I can fit them in the list. I absolutely love these, they're brilliant, and I'll explain why now. So the stone throwers have a minimum range of 12, maximum range of 60. They have strength 8 under the central hole, strength 4 for everything else that's going to be hit, AP 1 or AP 3 in the center hole. So they have the bombardment rule, the multiple wounds D3-1 as well. These are absolutely amazing. So these stone throwers do not fire under the crew's ballistic skill. Instead, roll 2 artillery dice. The first of the artillery dice is the same one that was used before with the cannon, which has misfires up to 10. And then the secondary dice is a directional dice. So this is where you're going to scatter. There are several different angles that you can go here, and there are also 2 direct hit. When you're choosing a target with the grudge thrower, you can pick anything that's in its line of sight, or you can choose to bombard. What bombarding means is that you can pick something out of line of sight, so you could hit something, say, behind another unit, or that's hiding behind a hill, or hiding behind a building. This is really good for sniping out enemy characters. Or if there's a little unit that's run away from you and you want to try and steal their points at the end of the game, and they've been running away for the last 3 turns. But there are some downsides to using the bombardment rule. So let's say that you've picked this target here that you're in full line of sight of. So what you do now is you roll the 2 dice. So unfortunately with this roll, I have scattered off by absolutely miles. So when you're picking your target, you firstly have to center your blast template over the center of the unit. And then you would measure the scatter in the direction that it's gone. Unfortunately this time it has gone 10 inches in a diagonal coming this way. So unfortunately there was no hits. But if I had rolled a direct hit, what that would have done is there would be one model directly under the center hole, and then I would have to work out my partials. The partials are any models that are touched by the template. So if you look straight down over the unit, you can work out how many there is. Sometimes as well, you'll be able to fit whole models underneath the template that aren't underneath the central hole. Those ones are automatically hit as well, but only at strength 4. The one that's directly under the center is going to be hit at strength 8. So most of the time you're going to be wounding that on 2s. So the rest of them, you're going to have to roll for the partials. When you're rolling for a partials, a 4-up is always a hit. A single model whose base lies underneath the central hole of the blast template is struck by a projectile and suffers a hit with the higher strength and higher armor piercing characteristics. All the other hits are resolved using the War Machine's normal strength and armor piercing characteristics. With the grudge throwers, you can do some serious damage. These templates aren't that big though, so what you want to try and do is always hit units that are quite large to try and maximize the damage that you can do. Another thing that you want to do is to be aiming for large targets with really big bases, because usually at dragons, a 2-inch scatter in any direction is pretty much a direct hit, apart from if you're just going sideways onto the smaller dragon bases. But that's still a really good chance of hitting, because that almost doubles the chance of a direct hit on the dice. A weapon that shoots using the bombardment special rule can do so even if it does not draw a line of sight to the target unit. That means you can shoot anywhere on the board that's within your range. This does have one drawback. If the arrow is rolled on the scatter dice, you resolve that scatter as normal, but if it's a hit, then unfortunately you still scatter the direction that the little arrow is on the direct hit, but you do minus the ballistic skill of the characteristic that is of the grudge thrower's crew. So the grudge thrower's crew has a ballistic skill of 3. If you order 2, that would still be a direct hit because it takes it to a minimum of 0. But if you order 10, unfortunately, you'll be scattering off 7 inches into the direction that the dice has rolled. I really like grudge throwers just for the pressure that they can put on the enemy in turns 1 and turns 2. It means that they have to come near you and they can't just hide behind buildings, and it helps you as quite a static army be able to control the momentum of the game. They are really, really good, and I would suggest trying these. So the best targets for grudge throwers would be large targets or units that are so big that if you scatter on them, you're probably still going to be able to hit them. Really good for sniping out lone characters as well. Also, one of the best things that you can do about these is hide them as well. So in your deployment, if you don't want the enemy to try and get to them, you could put these behind hills or behind woods or even behind buildings when you're just going to be bombarding out every turn and hoping that you can spike some dice and destroy the enemy. So lastly today, I want to speak about the organ gun. Our organ gun has a range of 30 inches, strength 5, AP 1, armor vane 2, and multi-barreled. The rule for multi-barreled means when shooting the organ gun, you roll 2 artillery dice before making any to hit rolls. The number of shots fired is equal to total of the both artillery dice. If a misfire is rolled on one of the artillery dice, you suffer a -1 modifier to hit. If a misfire is rolled on both of the artillery dice, no shots are fired, and a critical fault has occurred, roll immediately on the appropriate misfire table to begin exactly what happens. So usually, if you're keeping an engineer close to these, then you're going to be trying to roll that first misfire so then you can never suffer the 2 misfires. These are really good bits of artillery to deal with ranked up units and also cavalry as well. Anything that doesn't have too much of a save is going to be struggling at 30-inch range away from you, because you do have a maximum of 20 shots that you could do with this a turn. If you roll 2 10s, that is a blistering amount of firepower that's going to be coming at the enemy. The one downside with this model is unfortunately the crew does only have a ballistic skill of 3, which then means that you're going to be hitting on 5s at long range. because at ballistic skill 3 you'll be hitting on 4s within a 15-inch range, and then anything past 15 is unfortunately going to be hitting on 5s. You can give them reroll 1s, which does make them a lot deadlier, but I would definitely say that the best roll for these is going to be shooting at infantry or anything that's lightly armoured. If you're coming up against units that have got minuses to hit from ballistic skill, so say if you're playing against Wood Elves or any Scathe and Gutter Clouds, so anything that's -1 to hit or -2 to hit, don't shoot these at them. These really struggle once you start to stack the negatives to hit on them, and you always want to try and be hitting on 5s, rerolling those 1s at the worst if possible. So the best advice would be, if you're playing against the Wood Elves, use these to shoot at the Sisters or anything that doesn't have any -1s to shooting. Unfortunately, these cannot take any of the runes. You're going to have to either rely on running them naked or having an engineer there that's going to be helping them and buffing them. Just remember that you can't roll a misfire and use the reroll 1s at the same time. So fingers crossed, you get a really good roll. Definitely better than that roll, that was appalling. So that would have only been 6 shots, then 6 shots hitting on 4s because they were within 15. So that wouldn't have been too bad. We definitely probably would have killed a couple of them with it being strength 5 and AP 1. I personally think the best way to deploy an organ gun would be in the middle of 2 units, so that as the opponent's charging towards you, this can shoot and fire every turn as they're coming in and try and do as much damage to the units that are going to be crashing into your combat lines. As for all of the other artillery, if you have a hill, place it on the hill because then it's got line of sight to anything, and the 30-inch range is very good. One of the best tactics that I found when using war machines is placing them in woods. You can start the game positioned behind the wood, not touching, and then when the game starts in your turn, you can then pivot into the wood to be able to see out of the wood. Now the tactic for this is that the enemy can't see you in their turn if they go first, but you can see them. Unfortunately, it does say pivot to best see your enemy, so you cannot pivot away after you've shot. But if you did want to hide the next turn, if you didn't want to shoot, you could pivot to stop the enemy from having line of sight to you in the wood. If it's difficult or dangerous terrain, when the enemy is charging you through, they're going to be rolling their 2 dice and taking the smallest dice roll. So they could roll a 6 and a 1 and have to take the 1 and fail the charge, which means you've then got another turn of shooting at them, which really can mean the life or death of points in the game. Something else that you can do, if you're playing that your woods are dangerous terrain, then those units that are going to be crashing into here are also all going to have to take dangerous terrain tests. So not only are they taking -1 to their movement coming through, unless they have moved through cover, they're also using the smallest dice and taking dangerous terrain tests. So those are 3 really good ways that you can try to protect your war machines. I love putting my war machines in woods. So these are my favourite 4 of the war machines. I will talk about the flame cannon in the future, but at the moment I don't think it's going to see much playing games outside of fun, casual ones. So the best runes in my opinion would be the rune of skewering on the bolt thrower for the +1 strength and ignoring armor saves. For the cannon and the grudge thrower, I would suggest runes of forging to re-roll a single misfire, and also the rune of reloading. It just keeps them firing more. Unfortunately, the organ guns can't take them, which is a bit of a nightmare, but you can buff them with the engineers. If you're taking expeditionary force, what you can also do is upgrade these to have move and shoot, which then means you can be even sneakier with your deployment, sitting them behind woods, sitting them behind buildings, and then just popping out to fire. The best deployments: behind buildings, behind woods, out of line of sight, and relying on the bombard, unless you're playing against something that isn't going to be able to get to you, that doesn't have scout, and then you can have a bit of line of sight and just throw and try to destroy the enemy from 60 inches away. Bolt throwers on the extreme flanks, you want to try and get as far down the files as possible, or to act as small 55-point distractions that the enemy's going to have to deal with, or you could potentially plink a load of wounds. So the organ guns I would put centre of your army, get as many shots off as you can at 30-inch ranges, so normally you're going to have at least 2 to 3 turns of shooting, and you're going to be trying to whittle down the units that are going to be fighting your combat troops. For the cannons, I think the best use for these would be keeping them on opposite sides of the board from your other cannons, so that opponents have to either send units to deal with them, or they're going to be potentially hit by those cannonballs. One of the best units for cannons is to shoot units that either have evade, because you do not target the unit themselves, you only target a point on the ground in front of them, or to hit units that stack multiple -1s to hit. You negate that with the cannonballs and you can tear through most of those models that don't usually have much of a save. If somebody's lined up a nice unit of Pegasus in front of you, you can hit through them because you do D3 damage to each one that you wound on a 2 as well. So that is quite nice. Keep them on extreme flanks as well, and you normally have a good time with them. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. So the models that I've been using today are 3D prints. They are from Highland Miniatures and they were printed for me by UK Resin Prints, which is a sponsor of the channel. If anybody wants some discounts on some 3D prints, please look down below in the description. There is a discount code where it's 15% off anything on his website. It's a really, really good deal, so go and have a look. Let me know how you've been using your artillery. If you've come out with any secret tech that you'd like me to know, please leave a comment down below. If you've been struggling and you just don't really know what to do with them as well, please let me know and I can try and offer any input that I possibly can. Right, have a great day and I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.